welcome back to the channel, Justin.
Hey, thanks for having me, Peterson. I really appreciate getting to talk to you on the interwebs on some very important apologetic material that I'm sure is going to cook us, but we'll do our best to summon the power of the devil to defeat the wiles of these apologists.
Yes. Well, actually, the apologist is on our side because we are taking a look at Redeemed Zoomer's video, Amazing Scientific Facts in the Bible Explained. This guy's got such a funny and wild channel. I've done one or two of his videos, and what was funny about them was the comments were basically all saying like, this is like really dishonest. Here's my comment. Probably your single worst work yet. Honestly, incredible. But this time, everybody's just basically glazing the guy. So I thought that was kind of weird. The what do you call it? The court of public opinion, the public square, deemed him not worthy last time, but this time, I don't know what happened. So scientific, quote unquote, facts in the Bible. Well, I suppose we can get straight into it. Start at the beginning and see what he's got to tell us.
The Bible is not a science textbook. The purpose of the Bible isn't to teach us about the world, but to teach us about
We can
Jesus.
pause there.
Yeah.
It didn't take long.
No, it didn't. So it's not a science book.
I only say that to say this is a very common thing that people say. But I actually pulled a quote from maybe one of the preeminent scholars on the book of Genesis, because usually it's the book of Genesis that's causing people to say, well, it's not a science book. But there's two problems. Is one, it says things about reality, and we have to question, did it say things that are true? But from John Walton, in the Illustrated Bible Background Commentary, he says Genesis functions in Israelite society the same way that science functions in our culture, and the same way that mythology functioned in the rest of the ancient world. This was how they thought the world worked. You don't have to say it was science-y. This is their claims of how the world works. So whether it's a science book or not, we have to ask ourselves, is it true? Are the claims in the book true? And so I think saying this is not a science book is just trying to find wiggle room for when you find things that are clearly untrue.
It reminds me of when people I talk to say, well, I'm not a flat earther, but, and then all they do is tell you how they know the earth is not a globe. It's like, yeah, you're a flat earther. This is quite a lot of apologists do this. They're like, no, they were using hyperbolic language when they talk about things in the Old Testament happening, or it was never understood to literally be a 6-day creation. It's a divine council creation temple inauguration. I don't know if you know anything about that argument, and yeah. I don't really understand it hardly at all. I need somebody that knows their stuff to discuss why that is. But those are the vibes I get from this.
You actually raised a really good point that I didn't think about, which is when the Bible says things about the world that lines up with what they think is scientific, then they're like, oh my God, the Bible gets science right. But then when it doesn't say things that are true according to science, so they're like, well, the Bible's not a science book. It's a metaphor.
Yeah. I mean, people, this is the unfortunate position that the people of faith but who are not literalists find themselves in, which is they just have to pretend that people didn't believe in complete nonsense back then. Right. There's absolutely no reason that people who didn't even know why we breathe air would not have thought that an earth really could have a dome over it at one point, or that it really did rest on pillars, or that it really was made in, only a few days. Another thing this reminds me of, I don't want to comment on it too much, but did you watch when Alex O'Connor and Dinesh D'Souza debated not that long ago?
I did, and I got to be honest, I don't know how it happened. I don't know who thought it would be a good idea to get Dinesh on a stage with somebody with more than two brain cells, but it didn't go well for him.
No, and this is the exact part where it went so poorly, because Dinesh says that what it says about creation is true, but it's not a science book. And so Alex very wisely says, but it says the sun was created after the earth. We know that's not true. And the brain glitch, the catastrophic brain glitch that ensued after that. You got to look up the clips of that on YouTube. It's just, the way Dinesh is just like, well, it's not a science book. Anyways,
he gets a real bad case of the stutters when he gets stuck somewhere.
Yeah, he does. All right, so moving on. We'll see how far we get.
But because Jesus created the world, the Bible has surprising knowledge about how the world works.
We're going to see that a lot. Jesus created the world, so therefore what the Bible says about the world being created is true, even if some things aren't literally true, but this other stuff is true, so on and so forth.
It's amazing that the Bible gets this stuff right that you wouldn't expect them to get right because it's a sacred book, but don't expect it to get everything right.
Yeah. So, well, as we'll see, so much of it is just literally not true.
Especially because the Bible was written before modern science. First of all, the creation story in the Bible actually parallels what we know from modern science. Wait, I thought the Bible contradicts modern science?
Yes. Moving on. Moving on.
Well, maybe if you take a very literalistic interpretation of Genesis 1, which most of the church fathers didn't, but
Okay, well let's hang on that claim right there. The church fathers didn't think that the Genesis creation account was literally true. What is stopping people that believe in resurrections and all this other stuff? They wouldn't have thought the earth is billions of years old. Nobody would have had to have What's to stop them from saying that? Like, where do you stop saying Genesis is literal?
Well, I struggle with that because remember in the birth narrative of Jesus, his lineage is traced all the way back to Adam. So now you have to admit that the lineages going back to Adam were legitimate. Also, the creation narrative and the Noah narrative are treated by Jesus as being literal. He talks about the days of Noah. So it doesn't seem to be a mythological tale, but it also just like it says things about reality that aren't true, like you said. And he said that the church fathers didn't believe that they were literally true, but like,
yeah,
I disagree. For example, Irenaeus says we should leave all things of an unknowable nature to God who created us, being most assured that the scriptures are indeed perfect, since they were spoken by the word of God and his spirit. And then in the letter of Clement, he says, look carefully into the scriptures, which are true utterances of the Holy Spirit. Observe that nothing of an unjust or counterfeit character is written in them. And then this is one of my favorites. If you go to Tertullian, he says, the statements of the Holy Scripture will never be discordant with truth. Okay, that's fair enough. If the church fathers are saying that everything in the scriptures will never be in discord with what is true, then good. It must line up with science.
Well, the problem I have with this is, and I'm pretty sure Redeemed Zoomer thinks he's not a young Earth creationist. From what I remember watching this video, he's okay with it, but like how the Earth was formed, I don't know. But What's really annoying is these people don't have a biblical view of the world basically ever until it comes to contrasting like a secular view of things versus a biblical view of things, because they're committed to, in the back of their head, that the Bible is true, but they don't use that to navigate the world. So, they take this truth is that what corresponds to reality worldview, and they take like empirical studies as this is how we know things about the natural world. And when the Bible says something completely different, then they're just forced to take this perspective of, or to take the claim that, well, it's not literally true in this case. So what's annoying about that is they use, even though the Bible says this is the authoritative word of what truth is, this is the final say in what truth is, they use externalities, like in the natural world, to interpret what the truth value of what the Bible is even saying. I just find that to be completely contradictory if you're going to hang on to those other verses, like you said, or like, I can't remember what psalm it is, but it just says, like, people use it all the time to say, well, we know the Bible's true because Psalm 118 or whatever says. everything in his word is true or whatever. But I don't know. That's all I have to say about that, I guess.
My impression with what Zoomer's trying to do here is he's prefacing what he's saying with like the literal account of Genesis, meaning there's like 6 literal days of creation, then the day of rest. Somehow that's not literally true, but it's like it's got metaphoric truth to it. But like if we just read the first couple verses, it's clear that we're talking about actual days and actual nights. The Hebrew word yom just means a day, a period of sunlight to sunlight or night to night. And that's why at the end of every day of creation, it says, and there was evening, and then there was morning, first day. Then there was evening, and then there was morning, second day. These are literal days. There's no grammatical inclination to say that somehow a day was more than one day.
Yeah, I've seen the way people bend over backwards to try to, they point to another part that says a day to us is like 1,000 years to God or whatever. But like you said, it uses the specific word yom in Genesis, which literally just means a day. And they say the evening, morning. What I've seen people try to say is, no, that's just an account of events taking place one after the other. Because morning follows evening, we're just saying, and then it was complete, and then the next sequence of events started happening. It's like, it doesn't say that. Just stop it. Get help. And stop it.
I think the typical apologist line with the day not really being a day typically falls on going into the Bible and saying, look, there's all these other instances where a day is not referring to a single day. But if you look at the grammatical structure in Hebrew, they're yomim, there are days, plural. And it functions the same way we do in English. When we say, the days of old, it's not the day of old, it's the days of old. We know that we're talking about a period of time in the plural.
Yeah.
And the Hebrew does the same thing. When it talks about a single day, yom, it's referring typically to one revolution of the earth.
Yeah, it's like, well, if I say in this day and age, I'm talking about generally, it's like that could be years, right? But if I say yesterday, I don't mean the entire scope of the past. No, yesterday is literally just the day before today and not anything else. So, all right, let's see what we got next.
The order of events in the scientific timeline actually matches the order of events in the biblical timeline.
Okay, well, this just flat out is not true. He's got kind of a weird... Now, I could nitpick that, like, his numbers, even for the scientific timeline, are, like, they're off. I mean, the order... Well, I think the order is okay. Development of Earth, yes. Liquid water covering the Earth. I mean, his numbers are way off because that happens pretty quickly. We think we have oceans on Earth, like, literally only, like, 500 million years after Earth forms. But whatever. I mean, the order is right. Land and photosynthetic life. There really wasn't any land 2 billion years ago. Photosynthesis is more closely to about 2.5 billion years ago. Oxygenation of the atmosphere, he's about right. If we're just looking at chronologically and not nitpicking the numbers, that's pretty much right. And then aquatic creatures, I would assume he means animals, yes. Mammals later, and then human beings. So the biblical timeline. Well, we have 2 different timelines, right? That's problem number 1.
Yeah, you see the problem with day number 4?
Sun, moon,
day
and
number
stars
4 has... It doesn't say that they're visible on day 4. It says they were created on day 4.
Yeah, I don't know what people are trying to do with that. I've heard people say, well, either the firmament or something was obscuring the sky because there's all these clouds or whatever, so you wouldn't have been able to see them. So when it says they were created, that just means they were able to be seen. And once again, like you say, words don't mean words. Or what I would just say is, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say anything like that.
Right, yeah. Because in every day of creation, God says, let there be, and then the thing comes into existence. So what he's saying is, on every day of creation, God said, let there be the thing, and then the thing existed, except for day 4. On day 4, God said, let there be, but it was actually already there. You just couldn't see it. This is just inconsistent analysis with the text. It's called being dishonest.
Yeah. And yeah, the words don't mean what they mean. But so I mean there's a difference between the sequence of events in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 though, is there not?
Yeah, so if you go to Genesis 2, there's a slightly different sequencing of events, and I don't bring this up too often because my particular viewpoint was that, I don't know if Genesis 2, if the goal was to give a comprehensive day of creation. I think Genesis number 2, the goal was to get to mankind because mankind takes up most of that chapter. But to be sure, Genesis 2 contradicts Genesis 1. The order of creation is wrong. So it says on verse 4, if you go halfway into the verse 4, it says, "On the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, when no plant in the field yet had been on the earth and no vegetation had yet sprung up, for God had not caused it to rain, but a stream would rise out," so on and so forth. Well, if you just go through the ordering of chapter 2, it's just not actually in the same order.
Yeah.
So it's really weird that, like, if we have a Bible that gives two different creation accounts, God couldn't at least coordinate the two accounts so they would match?
Yeah, because in Genesis 1, humans are created last. We have the plants, the animals, and then man. And then in 2, Adam's created, and then he places Adam in the garden. And
That is it, yeah.
Yeah, and then the animals are created after Adam in Genesis 2, aren't they? Or does
I'm actually going to pull up a...
Or does it say God brings forth the animals? Because what I've heard people say is happening is Genesis, one of them is the perspective of creation from inside the garden, one is the perspective of creation from outside the garden. Which, again, it doesn't say that, but...
My perspective on Genesis was not as a perspective. The way I used to read Genesis was that Genesis chapter 2 is giving a brief summary of, like, okay, God created the stuff. Now let's talk about mankind.
Yep.
Whereas Genesis 1 is like God created all the stuff, and then at the very end, he's like, and then he finally made man. So I think the goal of the two chapters are different, but there actually are a couple charts on the difference between the order of creation. So, I mean, obviously, beginning Genesis chapter 2, God creates man, but like there's things that don't exist yet, like shrubs of the field, right? But that was supposed to already be created before mankind was created. Why weren't they there? There is an argument to be made that the shrubs of the field are referring to actual produce rather than just generic plants, but it's not entirely clear.
Yeah, that's true for quite a lot of that book, I suppose. But so if we can say, like, we can be charitable and fair and just say that, Genesis 2 and Genesis 1 have different, they were written for different reasons. So we don't have to say if they're not univocal, then like this proves or disproves anything. But we can say for sure is if we go back to this, no, it does not say that on the fourth day those things became visible. It says they were created. So this just simply is not how any of this worked, like, at all. So.
Oh yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, let's see what's next.
In both cases, we first get light on the Earth, then we get water covering the Earth, then we get dry lands and photosynthetic life, and that photosynthetic life clears the skies so you can see the sun, moon, and stars.
Okay, well, now he just doesn't know anything, because no, photosynthetic life did not clear the skies. Putting oxygen into the atmosphere doesn't make the air clearer in any way. So I don't know what he was going for there.
Yeah, but listen to what he said, though. He said that the photosynthetic life cleared the atmosphere so you can see the sun. But if you couldn't see the sun, how were they doing photosynthesis?
Yeah, I didn't even think about. The problem is there's like 5 things there, so I didn't even
So
think
many
about
problems.
that. So yeah, the sun was completely blocked until photosynthesis revealed the sun. Oh, that's
Also,
great.
keep in mind that he didn't mention the rivers on the biblical timeline yet. On the biblical timeline, rivers are made far before rain,
Oh no.
and specifically the rivers that he's referring to in the Bible, the 4 rivers are dependent on rainfall.
Yeah.
So
Well, we're going to talk about rain
These riv-
later because the water
right.
cycle is in the Bible, supposedly.
Then we get creatures in the water.
Yeah, right.
Then we get creatures on the land like mammals. And finally, we get humans. Compare this to other religions where the world is on the back of like a turtle or maybe some elephants.
Or rests on pillars and is a flat expanse covered in a dome. You wouldn't want to believe in a book that says that, would you?
it's also just not true, right? He took 2 of the most outlandish like creation mythologies and is like saying, well, all the other creation myths are ridiculous because look at these 2.
Yeah.
But if you look at the ancient Near Eastern creation mythologies, they're nearly the same as what he's talking about. And we'll just look at one real quick, if you don't mind.
Yep.
In the Egyptian creation myth referred to as the instructions of Mirikare, this was written in around 2000 BC or so. So at least 1,000 years prior to the writing of the biblical texts. So in the instructions of Mirikare, it talks about, mankind being created and then the breath of God being put into them. It says, well tended is mankind, God's cattle. He made sky and earth for their sake. He has subdued the water monster, and he made breath for their noses to live. They are his images who came from his body. He shines in the sky for their sake. He made them plants and cattle, fowl and fish to feed them. So this is not altogether different from the biblical text where God creates heaven and earth for mankind. He subdues the water monster. At the beginning of Genesis, it talks about how the Spirit of God hovered over the abyss. In Hebrew, it says tahom. And the Hebrew word has this connotation of this like watery chaos, really reminiscent of this chaos monster, like the water monster that we find in the rest of the ancient Near East and even in the biblical text, like the Leviathan. So this idea that the Genesis narrative is unique is not unique at all. In fact, we're going to touch on that a little bit as we get further and he starts talking about blood. But I just wanted to bring this one up now because the biblical story wasn't written in a vacuum. Comparing it to the Hindu myth isn't a good comparison. That's apples to oranges. If you compare it to the other mythologies of its territory and of its time period, guess what? They're all shared ideas. They're all saying similar, but not quite the same thing.
Yeah. And the breathing into the breath of life into the nostrils. That's literally what God does to Adam. And I don't know if it's both of them or just one or two. The other thing that's funny about this is, if we go back to what he said literally at the beginning, what's to stop any person from being a member of these religions to saying, well, yeah, if you take a literalist interpretation of it. So
that's actually such a good point. Yeah, because
yeah,
if you find problems in the creation narrative of the Bible, he's just going to say, well, it's not literal, or it's a theological text, it's not scientific. But then he would never say that about the other texts. The other text, he's going to analyze it as though it is in contradiction to science and it should be read literal. So
everything else,
they never.
Yeah, everything else, it's
he never
what does
applies the same criticism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All the other texts, it's what does it say? My text is what does it mean? So there's no charity to be found. All right, what's next?
The next thing the Bible is ahead of its time on is germ theory. For most of history, sanitation was not great, and even in many cultures today, there's a lot of room for improvement.
Roman sanitation was actually better than lots of places, during the medieval period in Europe. It just was.
People didn't really understand germs until germ theory was discovered in 1861 by Louis Pasteur, a devout Christian, by the way, but the Bible actually has very good sanitary advice in the ceremonial law.
Okay, before we get into this, because I have some questions about this that maybe you can clear up. What I would say about this is, here's something that we know. Well, let me back up a little bit. Some of these things in his video, the reason they're weak is because they're really not very special, if you ask me. So
Right.
with regard to washing your hands, you don't need to know that germs exist to have an adaptive behavior for doing that is beneficial to you. Raccoons do this, okay? And I don't think there's a Jesus for raccoons or anything like that. It doesn't prove that there must be a raccoon god or anything like that. Any behavior that people do that's adaptable can exist. Now, I think a lot of religions, and I'm sure Zoomer would probably even agree, a lot of the behaviors that people have, either socially or just like kind of intrinsically within us, we search for explanations for those, and then we create a religious narrative around them. So why is it important to wash your hands? Well, because I said so doesn't really work. But if I say because God says so, then that has a little more social capital to it for whatever reason. You know, like if you say, if you're a parent and a parent says, because your mom said so, then the kid's like, oh, now I understand. I understand it now. But anyways, did you want to say anything? Otherwise,
Well, there's a lot to say here, but I'm going to try to keep it brief. But this is a topic that within scholarship is not really, there's no apologetic for it within scholarship. So everybody in the ancient Near East believed that being unclean invited unclean spirits, right? That's why even in the New Testament talks about people having sicknesses that are blamed on unclean spirits. And there's a really interesting rituals that you can even find in the ancient literature to like clear your house of the unclean spirits by literally cleaning your house and performing rituals. And there's a really interesting one that you can find if you have a text referred to as the context of Scripture. Some of you listening may or may not have access to this text, but there's a really interesting passage in here from an actual Hittite ritual. And listen to what the translator says about the ritual before I quote it. It says, this text offers a tantalizing glimpse into the hero Hittite mythology. The underworld deities, referred to as the primordial or ancient gods, are solicited on behalf of a house possessed of various types of uncleanness to come up from below the earth and carry the uncleanness back to the underworld. So there's this idea that uncleanliness invites these bad spirits, and these bad spirits then make you sick. That's why they're always in the desert. You'll find, like in the book of Isaiah and elsewhere in the Bible, these unclean spirits are always in the dirt, in the desert regions. But the quotation from the text, from the actual ritual, says, "O Anunnaki deities, your tribute has just been set up. Accept these offerings to you. Chase out the bloodshed, the impurity, the sin, perjury, and threat of the house, and carry them down with you to the dark underworld." So impurity was akin to sin. Impurity was akin to bloodshed and perjury. Being unclean was inviting these evil demons into your life the same way sin would happen, right? And this is why we see elaborate rituals in the ancient world for cleanliness, not just what the Bible says. The Bible gives a bunch of cleanliness laws in Leviticus and elsewhere, especially for the priests because they're going into the temple and into the tabernacle. But guess what? All of these already existed in Egypt. They already existed in the Hittite lands and so on and so forth. So I've got one more quote on this, and it's really one of my favorite quotes because it talks about how important it was for the people to be clean, especially if you're going to enter into like a holy space, like a temple. And if you don't follow this instruction, you die. You get executed because you're in God's territory now. And the good gods, the ones up in heaven, they're pure, they're perfect. They can't be sullied by the dirt of the earth. But I'll just start out. These are the temple instructions for the priests in the Hittite temple, or the Hittite temples. It says, "You who are kitchen attendants of all the gods, cupbearers, tablemen, cooks, bakers, Vinters, be very respectful regarding the will of the gods for you. Maintain a great respect for the sacrificial loaves and the libation vessels of the gods. The place for breaking bread must be swept and sprinkled by you. Neither pig nor dog is ever allowed to cross the threshold. You yourselves are to be bathed, wear clean clothes. In addition, your hair and your fingernails are to be trimmed. Let the will of the gods not find fault with you. And he gives a whole bunch of other instructions for these priests on how to clean themselves and how to bring clean vessels into the space of God. And the punishment for not being clean, as we said, is you're done, you're toast, you're executed. So these are spiritual ideas. This germ theory he's talking about, in the ancient world, there was no germ theory. This was spirit theory. If you're unclean, if you're sinful, then guess what? You're inviting the evil spirits. They had no idea what germs were.
True, yeah. And even the idea that, well, we know, because what he's probably going to say is, I know that they didn't know germs existed, but what God's doing is communicating it to them in terms they would understand. But that's bunk for the reasons you stated. Real quick, I want to say that my favorite purity ritual, and I don't really know many, but the cleansing of the leper is just insane how many steps there are.
Yeah.
Now, I falsely thought that was supposed to be a cure for leprosy, but the preceding verse actually says, if the leper has found to be cured of his skin lesions, then he has to do this stuff before he's allowed back into the town to purify himself. Now it's like, okay, but purifying himself of what? Because he's obviously cured already. So this has nothing to do with, germ theory or anything like that. But this other stuff, the other thing I would say is, it's also obviously not that, because it says things that are just so obviously contradictory. Like that a woman is unclean for twice as long after she gives birth to a girl than a boy. There is no medical explanation that rescues that as being anything other than just some very convoluted misogyny, I guess I would say, probably in some way. Or that, if a woman's on her period, anything she sits on has to be burned or whatever. It's like you don't get E. coli from menstruation or anything like that. So it's just, it's silly. And for things where there actually is, I kind of started with this, but I'll end with it here. For things where there is something you could point to, like you're not supposed to circumcise the boys until like 8 days after they're born. And what we found is, holy crap, your platelet count is actually highest after 8 days. It's like, look, any group of people chopping foreskins for hundreds of years, they would have been smart enough to notice, hey, if you wait, then you get better results. You don't need to know anything about why this is working to observe that it works, and then to say God wills it to be that way. But anyways, let's move on here.
It says that is 100% how the ancient world developed these rituals, was by testing and finding out, not by having any actual information.
Yeah.
Yourself in your clothes, which many cultures today still don't do. It says to clean up your poop in holes and cover them up. Many people today poop in rivers. It says to quarantine after touching a dead body.
Hold on. I did, the first time I watched the video, I forgot that he mentioned that he totally misunderstood Deuteronomy 23. Deuteronomy 23 isn't just for sanitary purposes. It's because your feces is unholy to the Lord, and God himself is afraid that he's going to come into contact with it. If you read Deuteronomy 23, he gives the instructions for covering up your stuff, right?
Yep.
It says, you will have a designated area outside the camp which you shall go. With your tools, you shall have a trowel. When you relieve yourself outside, you will dig a hole with it and then cover up your excrement. And then he tells you why in verse 14. Notice he didn't put verse 13 on the page. Verse 14 says, because the Lord your God travels along with your camp to save you and to hand over your enemies to you. Therefore, your camp must be holy, so that he may not see anything indecent among you and turn away from you. So you bear your feces because God can't be around it. He's too holy.
God's just like, I ain't trying to see all that. What the hell? Yeah.
Right.
So, that's funny. Yep. Yeah. Just leaving out the very next verse. It's a strategy we've seen so many times.
Body and to
You
quarantine
ignored the context.
Yeah. Yeah. You ignored the context.
if you have a communicable disease. Furthermore, although the New Testament is clear that it's no longer sinful to eat the animals that the Old Testament declares unclean,
I see people on TikTok arguing that you're still he's like, Christians, you're still not supposed to eat pork, stuff like that, which I don't want to get into that. I just wanted to make the comment that there are people that still think you shouldn't be doing that.
objectively, there are a lot more
Yeah,
sanitary
for sure.
risks with eating these unclean animals.
But yeah, I've heard this argument like because you can get trichinosis from pork, that's why God said don't eat it. And it's like, okay, I mean, I get it, but you wouldn't need a God to tell you that. You could figure that out on your own. And it's just like, I think probably the dumbest thing about this argument is, what if the Bible, instead of spending tens of thousands of words to tell you all these elaborate ways to don't do things, what if the Bible just simply said this: germs exist, you should wash things, and you should cook food until it's brown in the middle. There.
You don't even have to explain it in depth. You just have to give the pertinent detail, and people could have understood it. They could have figured that much out.
Yeah, and we've discussed that already. The argument that this is how they would have understood it in their time is just an excuse for the fact that these words don't really mean, they can be reinterpreted to mean anything because they're so either hard to understand or intentionally vague or whatever. So anyways, moving on.
It is worth noting that most of the ancient Near Eastern cultures had lists of clean and unclean animals. The Bible didn't invent this. This isn't like something they did. The Egyptians had a list of clean and unclean animals, and they even have a mythology explaining why pigs were unclean. So you can read about why they actually gave you the reason. But like, even in the Bible, you can see that the Egyptians had their own idea of clean and unclean animals, because in Genesis 46, when the children of Jacob come and settle in Egypt, it says, when Pharaoh calls on you and says, "What is your occupation?" you will say, "Your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our ancestors, in order that you may settle in the land of Goshen, because all shepherds are abhorrent to the Egyptians." So there's the sheep and the pasteurized animals of the Levant were unclean to the Egyptians, which is why later in Exodus, when Moses is saying, can we go and sacrifice in the wilderness? Because if we sacrifice here, will we not be stoned? Because they're sacrificing the animals that are unclean to the Egyptians. So the Bible didn't invent this clean and unclean animal nonsense. This was very widely utilized in the ancient Near East.
Reminds me of, I don't remember the details, but I remember learning that the whole not eating red meat on Lent, it was like, yeah, some king just invented that basically as a way to like do an embargo. Basically, like it was almost like medieval tariffs or something. They're like, well, we're gonna prop up our industry and not buy from this other kingdom because we're at war with them. I can't remember exactly what it is, but something along those lines. Anyways, I grew up Catholic, so we took the Lent thing kind of seriously. But I remember one time my mom saying, we were traveling. I don't remember what for, and it was Friday. And, we had to eat. And my mom said, "Oh, it doesn't count if you're traveling." I was like, so we can eat whatever we want if we're traveling on Friday during Lent and God's cool with it? It's like, it sounds like God's just kind of a chill dude, not so. It's like whatever God's rules are or whatever I think the rules should be. So
right.
We make God in our own
It's weird
image.
that they're always changing.
Yep. Yep. The law that said it will never change is always changing. All right. Now, this blood one drove me crazy. It made my blood boil, but let's hear it.
There's a
I
verse
had a
in
lot to say
Leviticus
about it.
Oh, yeah.
which says the life of the flesh is in the blood. Now,
Okay. Well, maybe we'll pause right there. So do you have any insight into what that may actually mean?
Yeah. So in the ancient Near East, there was this idea that mankind was made from the earth, and then there was an element of the gods that had to go into mankind to make them alive, right? And the theory was that, well, it must be the blood and it must be the spirit, the breath, because when you no longer have those, you're dead. Those are the things that are animating you. You can feel the blood pumping through your veins, and when you cut your veins and bleed out, you die, right? So the idea was that life came from the gods, and the way that you got it was through the blood and the breath. And there's two really interesting creation myths that I want to pull from, two short quotes. One is the creation myth from Marduk. Marduk rose to prominence in the Babylonian pantheon during the Neo-Babylonian period. And it says, when Marduk heard the speech of the gods, he was resolved to make artful things. He would tell his idea to Ea. What he thought in his heart, he proposes, I shall compact blood, and I will cause bones to be, and I will make stand a human being. Let man be its name. I shall create mankind. So there's this idea that the bones itself was somehow made from compacted blood of the gods. And then in the Atrahasis creation epic, it says, let Nintu mix clay with his flesh and blood. Let the same God and man be thoroughly mixed in the clay. Let us hear the drum for the rest of time. From the flesh of the God, let a spirit remain. Let it make the living know its sign, lest he be allowed to be forgiven. Let the spirit remain. So the spirit and the blood were mixed with clay, mixed with earth, and that's how we got mankind. And the Bible echoes this. The spirit of God was breathed into the nostril of mankind. The life of man is in the blood. The same concepts of the ancient Near East just keep showing up in the Bible because these are shared cultural opinions. The Bible isn't saying anything interesting or novel.
Or anything that is to reiterate this point, anything that any idiot couldn't have realized, which is that you need blood to live.
Yeah.
I wish George Washington's doctors would have taken more of that advice, I suppose. But yeah, there's no. It does not require an omni super being to tell you that, hey, blood, that's good. It's just that's part of the weakness of so many of these. But let's see what else he has to say about blood.
everyone always knew blood was important, but they didn't realize just how important. In 1628,
No, I think they kind of did realize how important blood was. I think they really did.
English scientist William Harvey, who was a devout Anglican, discovered blood circulation. This means that blood gives life to the entire body. Blood gives food, oxygen, water, and other nutrients to the rest of the body, or the flesh, and in this sense, the life of the flesh really is in the blood.
Okay, here's what's annoying. I could make this video, but do it a different way, even though I don't believe in this stuff, and make an even more compelling argument, because what is the life of the blood? Well, I would just say it's the oxygen, and God breathed life through the nostrils into Adam. Oh, God taught us about oxygen in the atmosphere and in the bloodstream before anybody else knew about it. Anybody can do this. This is kind of a Texas sharpshooter fallacy almost, in a weird way, but it's with convoluted rhetoric and loose scriptural interpretations, I suppose.
Yeah, and it does like a weird component situation too. Like it takes a component of the body and just says, well, like if you don't have the component, then you die. Therefore, life is in the blood. But like we could say that for a lot of things about the body.
Yeah.
There's a lot of components of the body that if we don't have it, we're dead. If you're dehydrated, if you don't have water, you're dead. You know. And so it's like, yeah, you could take just about any vital component of the body, and if you don't have it, you don't have life. So even this idea that life is in the blood, it actually isn't true. Life is in the vital components of your body, whether it's water or blood, or even if you have enough iron in your system.
Yeah, yeah. Yahweh is when B12. We could just make that argument. So
Also, blood is very closely associated with DNA, so you could say the blue.
I forgot he said that. Blood is very closely associated with DNA. What does that mean? Here's what that could like. Here's an equivalent statement. Toenail is closely associated with DNA. Yeah, it is. Like urine is closely associated with yep, you'll find epithelial tissues in there. You can literally do like genetic testing with stool samples because epithelial cells always end up in the stool samples. So, I mean, if I wanted to super nerd out here and be really scientific, what I would tell you is that red blood cells actually don't have a nucleus. They're the only cells in your body that don't have DNA. So I could, if I wanted to be mean, I could sit here and say like, you could not have been more wrong. And if, according to the Bible, that's how this works, then therefore the Bible is actually anti-scientific. I'm not going to do that. I mean, I just did do that, but that's not really my argument. I'm just pointing out how stupid all of this is.
But he makes really dumb associations too. Like he mentioned that William Harvey was an Anglican. What does that have to do with anything? That doesn't make the argument stronger. That's just a weird random factoid.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. I don't know what people think that's like, Georges Lemaitre was a Catholic priest. It's like, yeah, you know that he didn't bring his Bible with him to work. And if he had only had the Bible, he would have never discovered these things. So like, what is your point? He also had a wiener. So are you saying women can't do science? He was also a white European male. So are you saying that straight white European men are somehow stupid? Nobody would ever say something like that, right? Right?
Yeah.
Right?
I think you nailed it. I think that's what he's getting at is like, well, these are godly people making the scientific discoveries because the wisdom is just right there in the Bible.
Yeah, it's supposed to be something like that. What kind of propaganda it is, I don't exactly know, but there you go.
Print for the life of our flesh.
Jeffrey Dahmer, he was a Christian, you know.
Yeah.
Is in the blood. That's why you say you're related to your relatives by blood.
No, it's not. You don't say you're related to your relatives by blood because blood and DNA are close. What did he actually say? Let's go back.
Also, blood is very closely associated with DNA, so you could say the blueprint for the life of our flesh is in the blood. That's why you say you're related to your relatives by blood.
No, the blueprint for it's it's like he's saying if you go and get the blood, then you'll find the blueprints for a human. Buddy, every tissue in your body has that, except funny enough, red blood cells are the only ones that don't. You know, it's like I can't remember what the other thing he said. Oh, when photosynthesis cleared up the atmosphere. It's just this is pretty bad.
This is really bad. Remember, this guy's got 500,000 followers, and like Christians they eat this stuff up. They're not going to look at it critically, the same way they're not going to read the Bible critically.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
The Bible is also ahead of its time in teaching that all people are related to each other because they all share a common ancestor. This seems like common knowledge today, but it wasn't always that way. In ancient times, tribes would slaughter each other because they didn't think of their enemy nations as even people.
That's not true.
You mean like, well, there is some truth to it. Well, we'll talk about that, but what I was going to say is, you mean like the way Christians claim that, the reason that genocide happened was because they actually intermixed with Nephilim and they weren't actually people? And the way Christians say that is still going on today, you know? Like literally, you guys think that there were... People have different ideas about what the hell the Nephilim are, like fallen angels, demigods, half god, half mortal, whatever, living here on Earth. there are a lot of Christians that literally think that they did exist. So no, the Bible is not a gateway to saying all humanity comes from what it does say. We all come from Adam and Eve, and hooray in a way, but it also does this disgusting less than human tribalism stuff.
Right. And it's not true to say that the Bible was ahead of its time, in that like they were teaching there was two original human beings and then they gave birth to all the rest of the human beings, because that's true in a bunch of creation myths, especially from ancient Babylon and whatnot. And even the idea that like they were all even speaking the same language originally, and then they became separated and became different nation groups, like the Bible says. That comes from ancient Sumerian literature. In fact, if you go, the British Museum has a really interesting artifact with some. I don't have a quote for you. I was just thinking of it as we were playing the video. But I mean, I have the quote. I didn't give it to you. Let me.
That's
actually,
fine.
Let me put it in the chat. Actually, so in the text, it literally talks about how all human beings were of one tongue, and they were building a giant mound together, and it says, "Small and great mingled on the mound. Babylon, corruptly to sin, went. Small and great mingled on the mound." And so we've got this mingling on the mound of these wicked people groups. And then what happens? Well, God gets angered, or the gods get angered at what's happening. And it says in line number 9, their work all day they founded, to their stronghold in the night, entirely an end he made. So he's ending the project. And it says, in his anger also, the secret counsel he poured out to scatter abroad. He set his face. He gave a command to make strange their speech, and their progress he impeded. So we have this really strange parallel to the Bible where all the people are related. They're all speaking the same language, and they're working on this group project. And God says, nope, not so much. So again, this guy doesn't know anything about history. He has no idea, what the ancient Near East, what the cultural ideals were at the time period. The idea that everyone came from a single couple or were all related was just ubiquitous in the ancient Near East.
But didn't you know the Bible was the first book ever written? Oh man. I mean, this idea that he says here that there have been cultures or whatever that considered other groups of people not really people or something like that. There's some truth to that, like the Dinka tribe. There are lots of tribes where actually their name is the word in their language for the people, or like humankind or something like that. So yeah, it's an avenue for treating other people differently. So what I would do, as a bleeding heart liberal type person, is just tell Christians to start being more Christian and stop talking about these stupid corrupted bloodlines and all that, and realize that we're all part of one stock, yada, 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 meet them on their own terms on that kind of thing. All right, what else about the human race?
In fact, even as recently as the 20th century, racial hierarchies were justified by saying that different races of people were actually different species, some more evolved than others.
That
Species?
Well, not exactly. Kind of yes, but kind of no. I mean, Darwin never said this, but there were other people that, I'm blanking on the names, but there were other people that thought that the different races of human evolved from different proto-human ancestors. And so that's why like people that live in Asia look different, so on and so forth. But I mean, the other thing, the awkward thing for Mr. Zoomer here is the fact that like literally Supreme Court justices in the United States ruled against constitutionally protecting interracial marriage on the grounds that God created people differently, and so we must keep them together. When you listen to segregationists from the 60s, it's wild how it's very bigoted what they're saying, but there's almost this kind of poetic beauty in there, because they say things like, look, God created all human beings. These are like different than the judge I was talking about or whatever, kind of. But they say something like, God created all these human beings to be differently, and we're all beautiful manifestations and expressions of God's creation. And if we start doing interracial marriage, then what we're actually doing is destroying God's creation. So it's almost like an argument It's almost like the kind of thing you would say if, like, you're a hardcore environmentalist and you want to protect a national park, you say God created it, so let's not destroy it. It
Right.
almost sounds kind of cute, but it's really just a very dumb and gross kind of bigotry, and you're just trying to control people's lives.
And to your point, when you look at the Confederacy and what they taught, like what they thought science was and what the Bible said, it's pretty clear that they believed that that if you're not part of the white race, that you were like a deficient race of human beings, and in fact, they justified keeping them as slaves because they could Christianize them, and then they could take the savage human being and civilize the savage human being, which is pretty disgusting, actually. Jefferson Davis talked quite a bit about that, the vice president of the Confederacy.
I'm so
In
mad
fact,
that I don't have it ready,
sorry.
but the kill the Indian, save the man motif in the Americas that was very popular in the 1800s. There's this, I really wish I had it pulled up ahead of time, but the guy that started in America, who was perhaps most influential in introducing those boarding schools, can't remember what they were called exactly, but he has this very long diatribe about talking about how they're going to kill the savage and save the man by just incorporating him with American values. And he specifically says in there, he says biblical supremacy is specifically how he talks about why it's important that we do this kind of thing, this cultural erasure, essentially, that occurred.
Right.
So yeah, there's it's obviously been used to do the exact opposite of what he says its message is or whatever.
So, yeah, if you read the writings, and I've got two quotes that I thought of just now that might be interesting. The vice president of the Confederacy was Alexander Stephens. Jefferson Davis was the actual president of the Confederacy, but this is what Alexander says. Alexander says, "Our new government," referring to the Confederacy, "is founded upon exactly the opposite idea. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition." And then he goes on to talk about Christian values, about how they're going to Christianize these heathen people. And then you get much the same from Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis gave a speech some time ago. I forget what year it was, but he said in his speech that the Bible allows for slavery, and because of this, how else are they going to civilize the heathen people? It says, I'll just read you a quote. "What then is their standard?" Referring to the people calling for the abolition of slavery on moral grounds. He says, "What then is their standard? The good of mankind? Is that seen in the diminished sources of the country? Is that seen in the diminished comfort of the world? Or is it not reverse exhibited? Is it the cause of Christianity? It cannot be. For servitude is the only agency through which Christianity has reached that degraded race, the only means by which they have been civilized and elevated."
Oh.
So, no, the Bible is not this, equality, egalitarian, tool that they want you to think it is.
Nice try. Those guys weren't real Christians, so
Oh, of
get
course,
wrecked,
that's right.
nerd.
It wasn't until people proved all races have a common ancestor that racial hierarchies became a lot harder to justify. The Bible is very accurate in describing the earth. First of all, it says that God suspends the earth over nothing.
Okay, again, any idiot looking at the moon or anything in the sky at night, I don't see how it wouldn't be obvious for them to come to a similar kind of conclusion about the Earth. But again, I mean, biblical cosmology really does say that the Earth is just a flat area with Sheol below it and at one point a dome above it. So, I mean, there's that.
The dome we kind of mentioned in Genesis comes from the root word rakia, which means to hammer out. So the verb rakah means like you would hammer out a bronze bowl or a shield, right?
Yeah.
And that's why everybody in the ancient world believed that it was just a hard dome. The Egyptians thought it was made of metal. The Bible says it's hard like a cast metal mirror. And it was over top of a flat earth. The earth was not round, according to the Bible. The earth was flat. Job 38, it literally says that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, right? And the wicked be shaken out of it, like a rug, like a fabric, right? And then it says, and it takes form, or it is formed like clay under a seal. Well, ancient clay seals were flat disc. You stuck your ring in it, and you made a flat clay disc seal, and it left a little imprint in a little bowl shape. So, like, every time the Bible mentions anything about the shape of the earth, it's definitely a flat earth with a dome over top of it. When Satan took Jesus on top of the highest mountain and he saw all the kingdoms of the earth, you can't do that if the earth isn't flat. You can't see all the kingdoms of the earth if it's a globe and you just go up to like a really high place.
Yeah, I typically don't like I don't go around telling Christians your book is a flat earth book, although I could, because I think that that's just, they'll for sure just think that I'm trying to be an edgelord Reddit atheist or something like that, and I'm really not. But what I would say is the Bible is really clearly a geocentric book, especially because of the miracle of the sun stopping moving in the sky for about a day. But we'll I don't know, we'll save that for another time. There's some pretty good gaffes that come up here if I remember correctly.
Which we know to be true today, because the Earth doesn't need anything to stand on, because that's not how gravity works. The Earth is just suspended in empty space. Now, once again, the Bible is not a science textbook. The purpose of the Bible is not to show us how the Earth works, but to show the glory of God, and it's just using this as an example.
I don't get this argument. It's not supposed to be scientific, which is to say a way of describing the natural world accurately. It's supposed to display the majesty of God. But what value does that have in being able to ascertain what's true? To me, the only value that has is if God can do anything, then we just need to interpret this book in whatever way we say fit and just say that's the way something is, because of the glory of God, and this text and word is authoritative, so on and so forth. I don't. There was nothing. There was such a meaningless statement. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of like weird empty statements throughout the video.
Yeah.
But like, and I guess since we're still on this, this part of the video, when it says he suspends the earth over nothing, they believe that there wasn't anything outside of the earth. So their worldview is still in alignment with what Job 26:7 says, not our worldview. They're not. The Bible's not envisioning our world. They're envisioning their world, where there was an earth that was surrounded by water, had a dome over top of it, and that was it. There's nothing else outside of that.
Oh, yeah, I suppose. All right, what's next?
The Bible's also correct that the earth is round. It even says that the boundary between day and night is also a circle.
But he's wrong there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think it says that. But also, what's funny is there's a Hebrew word for a ball shape, and that's not what is used here. It's the shape of a circle, which is, again, why the people that wrote that probably thought of the earth as, like, being flat. But what's this thing about Job 26 here?
Well, in the first verse he's got is Isaiah 40:22, and it's a really interesting passage because what it uses is the word chag, and that doesn't mean circle necessarily when referring to the earth. It does mean circle in Hebrew, to be sure, but it could also just mean an arc of some nature.
Yeah.
So, for example, it can get used of things that are semicircles or half circles, or just things that are round. But the way it seems to be actually used here is describing a flat disk earth with the heavens over top of it, like we described.
Yeah.
It says in Isaiah 40:22, he who sits enthroned above the circle of the earth at the top of the firmament. He sits above it, and he's looking down at the disk of the earth. So the Hebrew word can refer to a disk or a circle. Clearly here it should be translated as a disk because the earth is not a circle. The earth is a disk.
No, yeah.
What it can't be translated into is a sphere. That's why there's not a single biblical translation that uses the word sphere or ball, because it means a circular disk, a flat disk. And that's how it was pictured in the ancient world. And it was described in ancient texts. In the ancient Near East, they say the disk sun, the disk moon, the disk earth, because they envisioned these things as being disks.
So is this thing here in Job, is that really saying what he's saying, that it's describing the circle around the earth that is the boundary of night and day?
Not so much. So Job 26:10 is kind of describing the horizon, the way, like if you're in the ancient world and you're like, say you're on a tall hill and you're observing the horizon out in front of you, right? It looks rounded, right? That's why they thought you were on a disc, right? So it says he drew a circular horizon on the face of the waters and the boundary of light and darkness. The horizon is the boundary of light and darkness, and it was an arc, when you looked out at it. So again, everything here is in alignment with people believing that you're on a flat disk earth. He's just taking language that has a little bit of vagueness and saying, well, if you squint hard enough and you interpret it through a modern lens, you can kind of force it to say the thing that it doesn't actually say.
Yeah. That's par for the course. Yeah. Okay.
So I wanted to do a note real quick on 40:22, Isaiah 40:22, because
Sure.
the Net Bible has an interesting translation here. It says, he is the one who sits on earth's horizon rather than circle of the earth, because that seems to be the implication here, is that the circle is referring to either the circular edge of the earth or the horizon of the earth. And they did a translation note here, saying that it actually just means circle or disc. But there's a couple ways to interpret Isaiah 40:22, but none of those interpretive methods land on a sphere.
Yeah. No, yeah, it just says circle. It does. It's not. We're not using the word for sphere there. So,
Right.
Between day and night is also a circle. Let's focus on the second part of this verse where it says God stretches out the heavens like a curtain. The heavens in the Bible often refers to the skies and the stars, or what we would call outer space, and we know that the universe has been expanding ever since the Big Bang. And since Albert Einstein described space-time as fabric, it's actually very accurate to say that the heavens are being stretched out ever since the creation of the universe.
you go first because I actually have to collect my thoughts on this one. It's wrong in so many ways.
It really is. And so what we have, like this idea of the heavens being stretched out the way that it shows up in the Hebrew Bible, is it's typically referring to the heavens being shaped like a tent, not like the heavens expanding in like a Big Bang type of situation. For example, the passage that he quoted from literally says that. It says, spreads them out like a tent to dwell in, because the heavens, Hashemayim in Hebrew, just referred to the clouds and everything in the firmament. And guess what? It's shaped like a circular tent that you could dwell in, which is why Isaiah 40:22 says such. So it doesn't say anything about modern cosmology, about the universe expanding. It believes that the heavens were stretched out over top of a flat earth. That's why it says stretches out the heavens like a curtain. But like the cosmic universe isn't anything like a curtain at all.
No,
this is referring to tent imagery.
And what's being described here in Isaiah is a process that begins and then has a completion. That is not the Big Bang.
Right.
The Big Bang is still banging, right? The expansion is still taking place. But the absolute most asinine, annoying thing about this is the way he says, yes, not only did the author, or did God communicate to the author ahead of time that the universe is expanding, but God specifically communicated that Einstein would describe this as like being a fabric, and that's why he chose to say the word curtain in here or whatever, which is just so incredibly annoying and stupid. I mean, that's just the Nostradamus effect that's going on here is just really incredible. I guess that was my main gripe with it. You communicated things I was going to say about it as well, but that was the most annoying thing about this. All right, what's next?
The Bible's also right about how many stars there are. Ancient scientists, like most of the Greek philosophers, thought there were about 1,000 stars, because that's how many you can see. But the Bible says the true number of stars in the sky is innumerable.
It doesn't say that at all. It literally says that it will be like, or it'll be as numerous as the sands on the seashore. That is a countable number. It's a finite number, but it's just like one of these things where it's like, oh, I couldn't even tell you, or it's endless. Like we have an endless supply of whatever. No, we literally don't. That's just how people talk. But like that he threw these up here as if to say that. No, and I think he maybe starts talking here about the universe like may literally be infinite, but it doesn't say that. It specifically says as many as there are grains of sand on Earth, which is not infinite in any way.
Certainly isn't. And listen, you don't have to like have special knowledge to look up at the night sky, especially in the ancient world where there wasn't the lights that we have today, and see that there are a lot of stars, so many stars that you wouldn't be able to count them. And this wasn't like something the Bible invented. Like there being many stars is a very ancient idea. So like it's really weird that he keeps making statements like, well, the Bible is saying things that it couldn't have known and nobody else knew or nobody else mentioned. But like there's a lot of mentions in the ancient world about the many stars. So I mean, if that makes the Bible true, then I guess it makes all the other ancient texts about the skies true, because the ancient Babylonians and the Assyrians studied the stars. They quite nearly invented astrology. And there were, in his own words, an almost innumerable amount of stars in the ancient Babylonian conception.
I'm annoyed with myself because I just realized that I misunderstood the misunderstanding. Because let's look at what this says. Does it say that the stars in the sky are as numerable as grains of sand on the seashore? No. It says your offspring will be as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand on the seashore. So I screwed that up, because when I watched this the first time, I was like, how did he... I realized how bad it was. But yeah, no, the Bible doesn't say there are more stars than the ones you can see. And that's not what this says either. So yeah, it's just, it's right there. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say the stars are as numerous as grains of sand on the beaches. It says you will have as many descendants as there are stars. And then it goes on to say, not only more than there are stars, but more than there are grains of sand. So just a complete fail on his part. Well, my part too, because I screwed that up a little bit, but on his part. Yeah, that was very amateur hour-ish bad misreading there.
And today we know that to be true. There are billions of galaxies with billions of stars each, and that's just the known universe. Here's another thing in the Bible you might have missed. Psalm 103:12 says, "As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us." The purpose of this verse is to tell us about the value of the sacrifice that Jesus made for us to die for our sins.
Let me guess. No, it isn't.
I mean, that wasn't where I was going, but like this idea that the east is far from the west is like a nonsensical statement. It actually only makes sense if you believe in a flat earth. because in a globe model, there is no end to the east. Like you can't find the east or the west. It's just a direction, right? Like the east and the west are as little far away from each other as this. One is east and one is west. It's not a position.
He agrees with you. Just keep wait until you watch how unbelievably stupid this is.
Now, imagine if it had said, as far as the north is from the south, so far has he removed our transgressions from us.
This isn't the stupid part yet.
Well, that's a finite distance.
No, it can't get
it's
dumber.
12,000
No, it gets so much dumber. It gets so much dumber.
400 miles, or 20,000 kilometers if you're some sort of communist. But how far is the east from the west? Well, there's no
If you're a
east
communist, you use kilometers?
Yeah. So Australia,
Are you insane?
You're all communists.
The
whole
entire world uses it, except for oh my gosh, that's crazy.
I think that's still not the dumb part. Still not the dumb part.
I can't
but it's
believe
coming
it's
up.
gonna get worse.
It's coming up right here.
or west pole, that distance is infinite, because the sacrifice Christ made for us is infinite.
That's why it says east from west. Infinite distance for an infinite sacrifice.
Does he not know that you can go infinitely around the globe in the vertical direction as well?
Yeah, he just says, well, there is a north and a south pole, so that it's like, I mean, like geographically there is, because the earth is spinning, like in a way, but that is no more arbitrary than the international dateline or the prime meridian or anything like that. It really isn't. But like literally, like the idea that in order for what he's saying to actually be true, it would mean that the earth doesn't have a circumference. It does.
Right.
You know, it's just, but the infinite distance for infinite sacrifice.
It's the craziest thing too, because the way that he drew it, right? He's got an arrow pointing to the north and the south. Well, if you just erase the stars that he arbitrarily drew on the globe, you can go infinitely around it.
Yep. Yeah, you absolutely can. So it's, I give him 10 points for creativity at least. 0 points.
He
for
nearly
everything
got
else.
me.
Almost.
I halfway converted back to Christianity through that.
I dipped my pinky toe in the holy water at least, but then Satan pulled me back out.
Thank you, Satan. The
Also,
only truth teller in the Bible.
The only truth teller. That's pretty wild.
Previous verse says, "For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him." Now, back in the day, a lot of people thought there was a dome a certain distance above the earth, but we know today that the height of the skies from the earth is immeasurable.
Well, the biblical authors didn't know that. So
They certainly didn't.
where's your science
In fact,
now?
They believed that God was just sitting slightly above you and could hear your prayers. That's why it says that the prayers rise up to God, because they believed God was sitting in the clouds. That's why God's throne is in the heavens, in the Hashemayim, in the clouds. That's why everybody in the ancient Near East described the abode of the gods as being in the clouds. Like the ancient ziggurats were the gateway between God and man, because it lifted you up into the clouds. That's why all the high places in the biblical times were centers of worship, because you were closer to God. So like this idea that, the heavens are so remote, like super far away, it's just not in the mind of any of the biblical authors. The heavens you can practically touch them. They're right there. You can build a tower and get up there.
I just remember being very struck when going through all the talks about like the burnt offerings to do in the temple, how it always ends with, because the smell pleases God or whatever. And I was always like,
right.
he's
rises
concerned. Up. Like he's just so it's like just like the way he wants them to do things, because he likes the way it smells, is just like, shouldn't an omni being just be a little less shallow than this? But they didn't. It wasn't. Nobody had a concept of God being like the way we think of it now, this infinite omni thing or whatever. All right.
But to the point that you brought up, and not to make this 8-minute video 10 hours, but the pleasing aroma that the Lord takes from the sacrifices, it's happening because it's rising up into the heavens where he is, and he could smell it up there.
Yep.
So, like, if God was in outer space somewhere, then it wouldn't have to rise up to him. It would dissipate into the atmosphere eventually.
And if the Earth is a globe, then people doing sacrifices over here, it wouldn't reach. It wouldn't reach them. So, I wonder. I've never heard a flat earther say that as part of their argument before. Their biblical arguments are usually a lot dumber than that.
The Bible has some surprisingly accurate details about the ocean. For example, ocean currents are really important because they govern the climate of the whole world. They were discovered by this guy, Matthew Fontaine Murray, who was not only a devout Christian, but he was inspired by his faith in the Bible, specifically this verse that talks about the paths of the seas, to discover ocean currents.
That's a sentence fragment, so I'm curious as to what is being cut out here. I'm gonna look up Psalm 8 because I don't know it from heart.
Yeah, it's definitely part of a larger work.
Line 5 kind of starts a part here. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds, and the animals of the wild, the birds of the sky, and the fish in the sea, all that swim the paths of the seas. So it's just talking about fish swimming in the ocean. Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name. And it literally ends there. It's only 9 verses.
Right.
Yeah, this is... I don't know. I mean, it just says that fish swim the paths of the seas. I mean, I could easily interpret that to just literally mean it's talking about migratory patterns of fishes. But I mean, people back then,
right.
I mean, they were pretty far from the ocean. And I mean, it's crazy to think, but like even in the 1400, like in the time of Columbus, we didn't know what Africa looked like. Africa wasn't circumnavigated until the 1500s, which is pretty crazy. But I still would think this is one of those things where, like, when Muslims say the Quran says that fresh and salt water don't mix, it's like literally if you only had one eyeball and half a brain, you could write that fact down because it's just an empirical observation. And so I don't see how the idea that ocean currents exist would be special in any way. I mean, people that, like, there was seafaring that was going on to some extent, and people would have known that currents exist in the ocean. You don't need it to be divinely revealed to you. It's just obvious. So,
well, they already knew about it. So we have writings from the ancient Phoenicians, hundreds of years before the Bible, that talked about it. We've actually got writings as well from Herodotus and other Greek sailors mentioning ocean currents. Like, they figured out that they could find currents within the oceans that would aid them in their actual, like, journey to help them get to where they want to go to faster or to avoid certain currents, right? So to me, like, if we're saying, like, discovering ocean currents is special, then the Bible didn't discover them. They were discovered probably first by the Phoenicians, who wrote about them. And it's also true, though, that, like, even if you're not talking about ocean currents, you can take the passage less literally, talking about the path of the fish. But we know that fish have migratory patterns. We know that fish follow different pathways in the waters. We've seen it, right? So, like, just observing that there are ways that fish behave in the water was not hard.
no.
This is not a scientific statement about the fish currents opening up or anything like that. So again, it just fails on both on history and on science.
Yeah, nothing special really in this claim, right? What else?
So this isn't just an example of the Bible happening to match up with modern science. This is an example of the Bible specifically...
It's not even modern science. Like people in the 1600s knew that ocean currents exist. The Vikings in the 900s knew about ocean currents because they used them.
The inspiring modern scientific discovery. We know this because of a biography of him written by his son. When he was really sick one time, he asked one of his daughters to read the Bible to him, and she read the verse about the paths of the seas. So he said, if God says the paths of the sea, they are there, and if I ever get out of this bed, I will find them.
I mean, like, good for him, but it's so not anything special. The odds of it being a mere coincidence rise so vastly much higher than, oh, this must have been penned by, an omni being and creator of the universe. It's just nowhere close to rising to the level of probability than that. So that's
Right. And to be sure, if you go to the Odyssey by Homer, even in the Odyssey of Homer, it mentions the water currents, and Homer is way before the Bible. So like, yeah, the argumentation is completely fallacious here. And this guy who is claiming that God gave him the vision to discover ocean currents apparently didn't discover the writings of Homer.
If only he'd have been more learned, then maybe he would have discovered it earlier.
Jonah also talks about the roots of the mountains under the sea, and we know today that undersea mountain ranges are a thing.
Like, again, the idea that the land we sit on keeps going under the water is just so intuitively kind of obvious.
Yeah.
Unless the vast majority of people for all time thought that continents functioned like ice cubes, then this is just so unspecial to me. It's just like, yeah, there probably are things, but it also, I mean, like, he's trying to say that the Bible's talking about mid-ocean ridges, and it's not. It says the roots of the mountains that we can see go down to the ocean. So just a misreading.
We'll never get.
Yeah.
Is that, well, it doesn't say ocean in the Bible, by the way. There's not a word for ocean in biblical Hebrew. It just refers to large bodies of water. Yeah. So that's, he put ocean in there, but it doesn't say ocean. But as it turns out, the largest body of water in the area would have been the Mediterranean Sea. And there were legitimately mountain islands in the Mediterranean Sea. You had Corsica, Sardinia, Cyprus. So, like, they knew about mountains, having roots in the sea. And obviously, they believed that the whole earth was surrounded by water, right? So there's a watery crust on the outside of the earth that even the land mass you're living on now goes into a body of water somewhere.
I prefer a buttery, flaky crust, but that's just me.
The Bible also talks about the water cycle. The water cycle is pretty simple. It's just the idea that all the water on the earth gets recycled.
Except it gets it wrong in Genesis when it says that there's a water cycle before rain happens or whatever. Or there are rivers before rains. So I don't know what the excuse for that is going to be. God created the snow on the mountains, which fed the rivers, so you don't need precipitation for a while. Whatever it's going to be.
And the book of Ecclesiastes says this. It says all the rivers flow into the sea, but the sea never fills up because the water in the sea flows back to where it comes from.
I mean, again...
It flows back.
I mean, again, like, evaporation's invisible, but, like, the idea that people just simply could not have figured out that clouds have water in them. Water falls out of clouds, they knew that because you can see that happening. And the idea that clouds, if they're made of water, aren't sourced of water. And so then the water from the sea goes into the air and dumps onto, like, I don't know. It would be interesting. I actually have, like, the works of Aristotle, and he has huge volumes on the natural world. I don't know what he thought about precipitation, but, like, if I went into there and I read that, he absolutely asserted that the water cycle doesn't happen or something. Like he thought, no. All waters that enter into rivers are fed from the ground only. I mean, he did say really incredibly stupid shit sometimes. So then maybe this would be interesting, but not evidence of that it's divinely inspired by any means. What's really cool about Aristotle, actually, is he writes specifically in there. I used to read this to my earth science students that he says, surely places that today are sea were once dry land, and places that are dry land today were once the sea. And I was like, that's really incredible that he just kind of hedged a bet of this geologic change that we know today occurs over. That's the kind of thing that's like,
It's a miracle.
damn. Yeah.
It's from Zeus.
Yeah, because that ends up being true, and it's not an observable fact, unlike water go up, water come down, So anything to add
I'm glad
about?
you brought up.
Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to reinforce your notion that Aristotle talked about this because he does. He wrote in meteorology and in physics. I'll give you the two short quotes. In meteorology, he says, "Now the sun, moving as it does, sets up processes of change and becoming and decay, and by its agency, the finest and sweetest water is carried up and is dissolved into vapor and rises to the upper region where it is condensed again by cold and so returns to the earth." And then in his writing on physics, he says, "Zeus does not send rain in order to make corn grow. It comes from necessity. The stuff which has been drawn up is bound to cool. Having cooled, turns the water and comes down." So the Greeks knew about the water cycle, at the time of Aristotle already. And it's also true that Ecclesiastes was written incredibly late in the biblical Hebrew period. Everyone wants to attribute it to Solomon. Solomon didn't write Ecclesiastes. He's been dead for, dang near 600, 700 years when Ecclesiastes was written.
All right. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Very good. It's just really hilarious for me to imagine, because it's annoying when people say, "Oh, it rained, thank God." It's like, no, that's not it. Like, you can believe God created things, but it rains because of the freaking water cycle, So it's just hilarious to imagine Aristotle walking by somebody saying, "Oh, thanks Zeus," and Aristotle goes, "It wasn't Zeus, it was condensation, you idiot." So that's hilarious to think about.
The laws of thermodynamics say that matter can't be created nor destroyed.
Okay. Well, literally, the Bible, from the very beginning, is now scientifically debunked. Matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. Therefore, there is no creator.
Yeah, I think he just made the argument for us that the universe is eternal.
Yeah, no kidding. So, I don't know. I haven't seen this part. I don't know where this is going.
Now, they had to come from somewhere. Genesis 1 says God made the heavens and the earth, which implies that God made matter.
So it can't be created or destroyed. Well, but it had to come from somewhere. So it came from an uncreated creator. God created the heavens.
Yeah, I think the weird logical misstep is that if it can't be created, then it just always existed. That's the answer. No one created it. It just always has been.
Yeah. Therefore, the universe is necessary and not contingent. But they'll tell you that can't be the case because reasons, whatever. We're not here to get into that today. So, created the heavens, that's matter.
And Genesis 1 says that God made light, which implies that God created energy.
He said light before sun, though. If you read Genesis, he created light before he created any light-bearing bodies.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to me because how did he light is made up of photons. Where are the photons coming from? Why are they moving? Where are they moving to? What's causing them to move? If there's no light-emitting bodies, how are photons causing light to happen?
If you want to see something really funny, I can't believe I'm going to recommend this, but there's this inspiring philosophy debate that he did against Eric Hovind, and they debate this. The debate was, can a Christian believe in evolution? And Michael took the yes side and Eric took the no side. They specifically go over this problem of how the hell was there light and day before the sun was created. And watching Eric sit there and like watching the gears grind in his head, it's actually pretty phenomenal. Michael did a good job of dressing him down and making him look like the idiot that he is. So
damn, now I gotta watch it.
It's pretty good. It's pretty funny for the entertainment aspect of it, at least.
But Genesis 2 says that God is done creating. God's not still creating brand new matter and energy, which does line up with the laws of thermodynamics.
How does that line up with the laws of thermodynamics? Like there are still things happening. And then like never mind that this Genesis 1 is a bad translation. It says that the earth pre-existed and that God began forming what was there. Because the better translation in English is when God began forming the heavens and the earth was without form. It's a formless earth that God begins, shaping in whatever way he likes. But
yeah, and that's why a lot of scholars have just gone to the newer translation saying, when God began to create, which is what you'll find in the Jewish Publication Society. And even in most of the textual commentaries now, they'll note that there's no definite article. It doesn't say in the beginning. There's no definite article there. So there's this idea that they share with the ancient Near East where there's always like this primordial water, this primordial abyss of some nature. And God is just taking the primordial, nothingness and forming it. It doesn't say that God created everything out of nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent point. All right.
Now, childbirth pains are very interesting because it's only really human females that have very painful childbirth.
That is completely untrue. Do you know about hyenas, female hyenas?
Yeah, man, it's bad.
Yeah, so the female hyena, for those of you that don't know, this is not a fun fact, but the female hyena has this extremely long clitoris. We don't really know why it is. She uses it to like assert dominance over males in the pack or tribe or whatever we call it. But the other incredibly weird thing about the hyena, I can't imagine that this exists in any other mammal. They give birth through their clitoris. I don't know how that's even possible. But so the clitoris it's this very extremely long, extremely narrow birth canal. So something like 40 to 50% of hyenas die giving birth to, just trying to give birth. So I don't know what the hyena in the Garden of Eden did. I don't know what sin she committed, but they are clear. God clearly was like, after he got done talking to Adam and Eve, was like, and you, and then gave them we're missing the scripture verses for it, but the punishment for the hyena is just so vastly much worse than it is for the human.
And I think the giraffe has a very traumatic birthing situation as well.
Well, they definitely fall quite a distance, yeah. But
right.
Yeah, in terms of the hyenas, really the only one I'm well acquainted with for just how insanely difficult the birthing process is. But yeah, well, I mean, like, I think he actually might have specified mammals. Let me re-listen.
Interesting, because it's only really human females that have very painful childbirth.
Okay, no, he didn't say anything about mammals. But, in the insect world, and this isn't really childbirth exactly, but, I mean, there are species of wasp that the only way they can get impregnated is the male's penis is basically a stinger, and there's no, like, receptive site for it. So he literally stabs her just in her body through the cuticle or whatever it's called, and impregnates her that way. So it's as if you took a needle full of sperm and stabbed it into a woman's abdomen, trying to get it in the in the right spot where the uterus is, and just injected it that way. That's how they.
Crazy.
That's at least how they become pregnant. Yeah, the amount of the amount of barbarity with respect to reproduction in nature is just unthinkably cruel. And then, in terms of childbirth, there are probably, at least for insects, lots of insects that kind of die in the birthing process, I guess. I can't really think of one off the top of my head.
Don't like duck reproduction is crazy violent. Like
Yeah.
they even evolved like the twisty penises
Yeah.
to try to get into the twisty vaginas.
What's really funny is like 90% of birds don't have penises, and I'm not sure for ducks, but I think it's even true that most ducks don't even have penises either. It's very weird. It's very weird.
Why is this? Because out of all animals, humans have the highest brain-to-body ratio. It's painful to push out a baby because they have such big heads. This is why humans are smartest.
I mean, the shoulders are barely less narrow than the head. It's not that extreme, really. I mean, he's kind of right that, that is kind of why human physiology is so messed up, but I guess, I don't know, I've never seen a detailed study about the dilation of the cervix in humans versus chimpanzees graphed over the diameter of the cranium in humans versus chimpanzee newborns, but I wouldn't wager that it's really that different. I wouldn't, so I don't know.
It can't be that different. And then also, like, there are animals I'm thinking of that have pretty huge heads, like rhinoceroses, hippos. Those are really big heads.
Yeah. It would be, should have done my research, I guess, but it would be really interesting to see the, maternal death rate in humans versus other animals. I mean, I'm sure, obviously because of modern technology, it's extraordinarily low in us. But even before that, I don't know. I just wouldn't think that. And it's not like other animals go around saying "ow, ow, ow." I mean, they don't express it that way, but they certainly feel pain. That's another very weird, like, Christian specific argument that animals don't feel pain. That we won't be getting into here today, but it exists.
Because they have the biggest brains relative to their bodies. Now, in the story of Genesis, Eve was punished for eating the fruit which gave her knowledge by having birth pains.
Right. So this argument could only really work if you just think that Adam and Eve had smaller heads than modern humans or something like that. It's just really pretty dumb. But again, like, humans have known forever that childbirth is quite an ordeal, and the idea that they would come up with a religious explanation for it is just so typical of what humans do. Like, oh, volcanic soil is fertile? Why is that? Because because the volcano literally is a god. Dang, what should we do? I don't know, throw infants into it every now and then? Okay, let's do that,
But there's some really weird implications by what he's saying too. He's suggesting that before Adam and Eve ate the fruit, that somehow their bodies were different, in which there wouldn't be painful childbirth. Okay, so if you ask yourself, well, what was the difference? What was it? Was her private parts much larger, so the head of the baby could fit through more easily? And if that's the case, then Adam's member would have been much larger as well, or else I don't know if he could have done his task right. So that these really weird questions come up, like, okay, well, if there was no pain, why was there no pain? The body must have been different. Well, how was the body different? And does it even make sense to envision a body that was so different that you couldn't have any pain in childbearing? This is like a really weird entailment with the argument that he's making. Doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, or like I said, you'd have to argue that Adam and Eve were like needleheads or something,
Yeah, like you said, like they had tiny heads, so it just didn't hurt when they were, or maybe they were born much smaller. They only gestated for 6 months, and they were born tiny, and God just did a miracle and said, "Okay, now it's 9 months."
Well, no, Adam and Eve were 15 feet tall. Kent Hovind says so. I don't.
That's right.
We'll have to talk about that someday. I don't fucking get that claim that they were, but it's a very popular idea. I don't understand it, but whatever. Some other
My
day.
head hurt thinking about it.
In the Bible, birth pains are a direct result of getting more knowledge or more brain power.
No pain, no gain.
In Genesis 3:16, God says to Eve that he will make her pains in childbearing very severe. And according to evolutionary biology, human childbirth became very painful as humans evolved to get smarter and get bigger brains. So while these scientific facts...
What?
I'm not.
He did not quote a single scientist when he said that.
No, yeah, according to evolutionary biology. No, I mean, that's kind of the end of the video, so we can get rid of that. But yeah, I mean, what do you do? Like, these evolutionary theists, they're so cute because, you know, for all the ways they try to hybridize this, which, like, I'm glad that they accept it, but at the same time, it's like, you know that there was Homo erectus? So is Homo erectus burning in hell? Is Homo erectus made in God's image? Did Homo erectus have childbirth pains? You know, it's really not, or Neanderthals, you know, something like that. It's really, like they're trying to sound like they're trying to come across as like the enlightened ones or whatever, like, you know, not so like stuck in their ways and dogmatic. And again, I'm glad for it, but it's not like that doesn't produce really serious problems and completely unanswerable problems. You know, it's like, I was going to mention this earlier, you know, did Adam and Eve have belly buttons? Was Adam circumcised? You know, these are completely unanswerable questions. But, you know, there have been much dumber theological arguments for, like, you know, did Mary ascend into heaven, body and soul? Well, some Catholic guy 500 years, 7,000 years ago figured out that she did by reading the scripture. It's like, but it's not in there, you know, and all the, like, the Immaculate Conception, it's not anywhere in there. It's just this theological argument that somebody came to because you can't do empirical investigations by using scripture. It doesn't actually work in any meaningful way. And so, you know, same for all this other stuff.
And you kind of raised a good point when you talk about, you know, at what point, when we have like the precursors to modern man time, at what point did they become human and, you know, get the image of God or whatever you might call it? And like he briefly touched on this kind of sideways when he said that, well, you know, the painful childbirths happened according to science as the human brain got bigger because, you know, you needed a larger skull to fit more knowledge. But what he's suggesting here is that there was a time period of human evolution that is coinciding with the Genesis narrative, which means, according to his viewpoint, in the evolutionary tree, at some point, God just pointed and said, okay, now these are actual humans, and now you get painful childbirths. Because if he didn't do that, then it's just an evolutionary thing that happened that had nothing to do with what God did. Because what God did was all in one day. It wasn't a progress of slowly bigger brains, slowly bigger skulls. God said, okay, you did the thing I said not to do. Now you got giant heads. So, like, his own appeal to science is contradicting what the Bible says.
Yeah. No, yeah, very much so. And we saw that multiple times. I'm just wrapped up in the idea of that they were punished for doing something wrong when they didn't know the difference between right and wrong. That's just always...
Gosh, I know. That's the craziest part. Yeah.
It makes no sense. But that's not really the scope or the purpose of this video. Justin, I guess go ahead and tell us like what you've been up to, what you're up to, what you got coming up, where people can reach you, what to look forward to, all that good stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So coming up, I've got some long form videos that are going to be out on my YouTube channel, doing a lot of the content that comes out during my debates on the prophecies. So a lot of people have been asking me to do long form videos explaining the ins and outs of the prophecies and going into some of the textual issues that need to be resolved. There's like within the Hebrew and Greek manuscripts and whatnot. So those videos are coming out, and then as always, I'm debating on Wednesday night, Friday night, and Sunday night typically on TikTok and on YouTube at Deconstruction Zone, and hosting once or twice a month on the Atheist Experience. Debating there as well, and who knows, maybe I'll be on the line in the near future again too. But so right now it looks like lots of debates, and look forward to some long form content. You can find me at Deconstruction Zone on TikTok and on YouTube.
Thought I was muted, but I wasn't. Yeah, that's excellent. So thanks for being here. That was a lot of fun. It was.
Thanks for having me.
It would not have been as good if it were just me. So glad you came.
I'm sure it would have been great still. I really appreciate your voice in this space. So I appreciate you having me, and I'm sure we'll do more in the future.
Oh yeah, we've got one in mind actually for next time. So I'll see you later, everybody.